The sun was a copper coin pressed against the horizon when Caleb rode into Benton's crossing. The town sat quiet, the kind of quiet that makes a man check his sidearm without thinking. Dust hung in the air like it had nowhere else to go. He'd come for supplies, coffee, maybe some cornmeal, nothing that required more than an hour's stop. But as he guided his mare past the general store, he heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the evening wind. Laughter, harsh, with edges like broken glass. Caleb slowed his horse. The laughter came from behind the saloon, where the alley opened into a dirt courtyard. A small crowd had gathered, maybe 15, 20 people, men mostly, but a few women too, standing back with their arms folded tight across their chests. He dismounted, looping the reins loosely around a post. His boots made no sound in the dust as he walked toward the gathering. When he got close enough to see, his stomach turned cold. A young woman knelt in the center of the courtyard. Her hands were bound behind her back with coarse rope, the kind used for tying down livestock. Her ankles were tied too, pulled tight so she couldn't stand, couldn't run. She wore a plain cotton dress, torn at the shoulder, stained with dirt and something darker. But it was her hair that stopped him. Or what was left of it. It had been hacked off, unevenly, cruelly, left in jagged clumps that barely reached her jawline. Strands of dark hair lay scattered in the dust around her knees like the remnants of something sacred that had been desecrated. She was crying, not loud, wailing sobs, but the kind of crying that comes when shame has already swallowed your voice. Her head was bowed, her shoulders shaking. "Please," she whispered, "please don't look." A man stood over her, grinning. He was thick-shouldered, with a belt that strained against his gut and a badge pinned to his vest. Sheriff, by the look of it. He held a bottle in one hand and a fistful of her shorn hair in the other. "This here's what happens," the sheriff announced to the crowd, his voice thick with whiskey and authority, "when a woman forgets her place, when she thinks she can steal from honest folk and lie about it." "I didn't steal anything," the woman said, her voice breaking. "I swear I didn't." The sheriff kicked dust toward her face. She flinched, turning her head away. "Shut your mouth, girl. You were seen. You took bread from the baker's window and you got caught. That's theft. And in Benton's Crossing, we don't coddle thieves." One of the men in the crowd spat into the dirt. "Should have done worse than cut her hair, Sheriff. My pa used to brand 'em." A few others murmured agreement. A woman in a faded blue dress looked away, her lips pressed into a thin line, but she said nothing. Caleb stood at the edge of the crowd, his hat pulled low. His jaw was tight, his hands hanging loose at his sides. He didn't move yet. He was still taking it in, the ropes, the hair, the way no one was stepping forward. The sheriff tossed the clump of hair into the dirt and turned to the crowd. "Anybody want to take her off my hands? She's got no family, no husband, can't pay her fine, so she's up for grabs. Work her, sell her, I don't care, just get her out of my town." Caleb's chest tightened. The woman's head lifted slightly. Her eyes, red-rimmed, full of tears, scanned the crowd, not looking for help, just looking for one face that might show mercy, one person who might see her as human. Her gaze landed on Caleb. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then she looked down again, her lips trembling. "They cut my hair to shame me," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "They cut it all off." Caleb felt something twist deep in his gut. Not pity, something sharper, something that made his hands curl into fists. He'd seen this before, not here, not exactly like this, but the pattern was the same: power without accountability, cruelty dressed up as justice, and a crowd too afraid or too comfortable to say a word against it. The sheriff took another swig from his bottle. "Last call, folks. Anybody? She's young enough, strong enough, probably clean up decent if you hose her down." No one spoke. Caleb stepped forward. The crowd parted slightly as he moved through them. The sheriff turned, squinting at him with the lazy arrogance of a man who'd never been challenged in his own town. "Something you want, stranger." Caleb stopped a few feet away. His voice was low, steady. "I'll take her." The sheriff's grin widened. "Well now, didn't peg you for the charitable type. I'm not. Then what, you got plans for her? Caleb didn't answer. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch. He tossed it to the sheriff, who caught it with one hand and felt its weight. That's $50, Caleb said, more than enough to cover whatever fine you're pretending she owes. The sheriff opened the pouch, counted the coins slowly, then looked back at Caleb with a smirk. $50. Ours for a thief, you're either stupid or soft. Neither. Then what's your game? Caleb's eyes didn't waver. Cut her loose. The sheriff laughed, but it was a thin sound. He glanced at the crowd, then back at Caleb. Something in the stranger's stillness made him uneasy. This wasn't a man looking for a fight, but it wasn't a man who'd back down either. After a long moment, the sheriff nodded to one of his deputies, a wiry man with a pockmarked face. Cut the ropes. The deputy pulled a knife and moved toward the woman. She didn't look up, didn't move. She just knelt there, trembling, as the blade soared through the bindings at her wrists. When the ropes fell away, she gasped softly, bringing her hands forward. Her wrists were raw, red, and torn from struggling. The deputy cut the rope at her ankles next, then stepped back. She didn't stand. She stayed on her knees, head bowed, as if she didn't believe she was allowed to rise. Caleb walked over to her. The crowd watched in silence. He took off his hat, a wide-brimmed, worn leather thing that had been with him for more years than he could count, and crouched down in front of her. "Look at me," he said quietly. She didn't. "Look at me." Slowly, her tear-streaked face lifted. Her eyes were green, bright against the dirt and the pain. She looked at him like she was waiting for the next cruelty. Caleb placed the hat gently on her head. Her breath hitched. Her hands came up instinctively, touching the brim like she didn't understand what it meant. "You don't kneel anymore," Caleb said. His voice was soft, but there was steel beneath it. Not for him, not for them, not for anyone. Her lips parted, but no words came out. He stood and offered her his hand. For a long moment, she just stared at it. Then, trembling, she reached up and took it. Caleb pulled her to her feet. She swayed slightly, unsteady, but he kept his grip firm until she found her balance. The crowd murmured. The sheriff's grin had faded. Caleb turned to face him. "We're done here." The sheriff stepped forward, his hand resting on the butt of his revolver. "You just bought yourself a world of trouble, stranger." Caleb met his gaze without flinching. Wouldn't be the first time. He turned, keeping the woman close, and walked back toward his horse. She followed, her steps hesitant, his hat still perched on her head like a crown she didn't know she was allowed to wear. Behind them, the crowd slowly dispersed. The sheriff stood in the courtyard, watching them go, his jaw tight. Caleb didn't look back. When they reached the mare, he untied the reins and handed them to her. "Can you ride?" She nodded, though her hands were shaking. "Then get on." She hesitated. "Where are we going?" Caleb swung up into the saddle behind her, "Away from here." As they rode out of Benton's crossing, the sun finally dipped below the horizon, and the town fell into shadow. The woman didn't say a word. She just held onto the saddle horn, Caleb's hat casting a shadow over her ruined hair, and let the tears fall silently into the dust. They rode for an hour before Caleb slowed the mare. The land opened up into scrub brush and low hills, the kind of country where a man could disappear if he wanted to. The moon was rising, pale and distant. He guided the horse toward a shallow creek lined with cottonwoods. The water moved slow and quiet over smooth stones. "We'll stop here," he said. She slid down from the saddle without a word, her legs unsteady. She stood by the creek, her arms wrapped around herself, his hat still on her head. Caleb dismounted and tended to the mare, loosening the saddle, checking her hooves. He worked in silence, letting the woman have space. He'd learned long ago that some people needed quiet before they could speak. After a while, she knelt by the water and cupped her hands, splashing her face. The dirt ran off in dark streaks. She scrubbed at her wrists, where the ropes had bitten deep. Caleb pulled a canteen from his saddle and walked over, holding it out. Drink first. Creek water's not always clean. She took it, her hands still trembling, and drank slow. When she handed it back, she finally spoke. Why did you do that? Caleb crouched down beside the creek, his gaze on the water. Seemed like the thing to do. Nobody does something like that for no reason. He didn't answer right away. He just watched the current move over the stones. What's your name? He asked. Eliza. Eliza what? She hesitated. Cartwright. The name hit him like a fist to the chest. He went very still. Cartwright, he repeated, his voice low. She nodded, looking at him carefully now. You know the name. Caleb's jaw tightened. He looked away, out toward the dark horizon. Yeah, I know it. Silence stretched between them, heavy and sharp. Eliza's eyes narrowed. How? He didn't speak for a long moment. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather billfold. From it, he took a faded photograph, creased, worn at the E. Jess, he held it out to her. She took it, tilting it toward the moonlight. The photograph showed a family, a man and a woman standing in front of a farmhouse, two young girls beside them. One of the girls, maybe 8 years old, had long dark hair and a serious expression. Eliza's breath caught. That's my family, she whispered. That's my father, my mother, my sister. She looked up at him, her face pale. Where did you get this? Caleb's voice was rough. I was there the day it was taken. Your father hired a traveling photographer. I was working his ranch that summer, fixing fences, herding cattle. I was 16. Eliza stared at him. You worked for my father. For 3 months. Then you know what happened. Caleb nodded slowly. I know. Her hands tightened on the photograph. Do you know who did it? He met her gaze. His eyes were dark, full of something that looked like old guilt. Yeah, I know. Then tell me. Caleb stood, turning away from her. He stared out at the night, his shoulders tense. It was just after the war ended. Your father, he owned good land, fertile, water rights. A lot of men wanted it. There was a deputy marshal named Kern. He had connections, money from back east. He wanted your family's land, but your father wouldn't sell. Eliza's voice was cold, so Kern had him killed. Not directly. He went to the army, told them your father was a Confederate sympathizer, that he was hiding deserters. It was a lie, but nobody cared. The war was over, but people were still angry, still looking for someone to blame. Caleb's voice dropped. They came at night. Soldiers burned the house. Your father tried to stop them. They shot him in the yard. Eliza's face was stone. And my mother. She tried to run with you and your sister. They caught her. I don't know what happened after that, but by morning, the farm was ash. And you, Eliza's voice was sharp now, cutting. Where were you? Caleb turned to face her. His expression was raw. I was there. She stood, her hands shaking. You were there. I was in the barn. I heard the shouting. I saw the torches. I saw your father fall. And you did nothing. I was 16 years old, Eliza. I had a rifle with 6 rounds and no horse. There were 20 soldiers. So you hid? Yes. Her eyes filled with tears, but her voice was fury. You hid while they burned my family alive. Yes. She stepped toward him, her fists clenched. You could have tried, you could have. I could have died with them, Caleb said, his voice breaking. And I wanted to. I stood in that barn with my rifle aimed at the door, and I wanted to run out there and die like a man. But I didn't. I stayed in the shadows and I listened to your mother scream, and I did nothing. His voice cracked, and I've lived with that every day since. Eliza stared at him, her chest heaving. I kept the photograph, Caleb said quietly, because I didn't want to forget what my cowardice cost. She turned away from him, her hands pressed to her mouth. For a long moment, she didn't speak. When she finally did, her voice was shaking. You think buying me makes it better? No. You think putting your hat on my head erases what you did. No. Then what do you want from me? Caleb's voice was hoarse. Nothing. I don't want forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wasn't going to stand by again, not this time. Eliza stood by the creek, trembling. The photograph was still clutched in her hand. After a long silence, she looked down at it again, at her father's face, her mother's, her sister's. "They're all gone," she whispered. "Everyone in this picture except me." Caleb nodded. "I know." She turned to him, her eyes red. "And you want to help me now, after all this time?" "I don't expect you to accept it, but yes." She let out a bitter laugh. "You're 16 years too late, Cowboy." "I know." The wind moved through the cottonwoods, rustling the leaves. The creek flowed on, indifferent. Eliza wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She looked at the photograph one more time, then handed it back to him. "Keep it," she said. "I don't need it to remember what I lost." Caleb took it, slipping it back into his coat. She turned and walked to the edge of the creek, staring out at the dark hills. "Where were you planning to take me?" "There's a town 2 days north, smaller than Benton's Crossing, quieter. I know people there who'd give you work, a place to stay." "And then you do what you want. You don't owe me anything." Eliza was quiet for a long time. Finally, she spoke, her voice softer now. "That sheriff back there, he's going to come after you." "Probably." "You know that, and you still did it." Caleb shrugged. "Some things are worth standing for." She turned to look at him, her expression unreadable. "You think that makes you brave?" "No, just less of a coward than I was." Eliza shook her head slowly. Then, after a moment, she took off his hat and held it out to him. "You should take this back." Caleb didn't move. "Keep it." "Why?" "Because you're not done needing it yet." She looked at the hat in her hands, then back at him. Slowly, she put it back on her head. "I don't forgive you," she said quietly. "I know. But I'll ride with you, for now." Caleb nodded. "That's enough." They stood in the moonlight by the creek, two people bound by a past neither of them could change, and a future neither of them could see. They reached the town of Silver Ridge by late afternoon 2 days later. It was smaller than Benton's Crossing, just a single dirt road lined with wooden buildings, a general store, a blacksmith, a modest church with a crooked steeple. Caleb had been quiet most of the ride, so had Eliza. They'd camped under the stars the night before, barely speaking. She still wore his hat. He'd noticed she adjusted it whenever the wind tried to take it. As they rode into town, a few townsfolk glanced their way. An old man sitting outside the general store nodded at Caleb. A woman hanging laundry paused, her eyes lingering on Eliza's shorn hair before she looked away. Caleb guided the mare toward a small boarding house at the end of the street. The sign above the door read "Bellamy's Rooms, clean beds, fair prices." He dismounted and helped Eliza down. She stood for a moment, looking at the building. "You know the owner?" she asked. "I know her, she's fair. She'll give you a room and work if you want it." Eliza nodded slowly. "And you?" "I'll stay a night, make sure you're settled, then I'll move on." She looked at him, something unreadable in her expression. "You don't have to do that." "I know." Before he could say more, the sound of hoofbeats echoed down the street. Caleb turned, his hand instinctively moving toward his hip. 4 riders appeared at the far end of town, moving slow. They wore long coats, their hats pulled low, but even from a distance, Caleb recognized the lead rider. Sheriff from Benton's Crossing. His stomach went cold. Eliza saw them too, her breath quickened. "That's him." "I know." The riders stopped in the middle of the street, about 50 yards away. The sheriff dismounted, his deputies following. He adjusted his gun belt and started walking toward them. Caleb stepped forward, positioning himself between Eliza and the approaching men. "Stay behind me." "Caleb, stay behind me." The sheriff stopped 10 feet away. He grinned, the same lazy, cruel grin from before. "Well now, Didn't think I'd catch up to you so quick, stranger. Caleb's voice was steady. You've got no business here, Sheriff. This isn't your town. Oh, I got business. You stole my prisoner. I paid her fine. You paid for her release. Didn't say nothing about taking her across county lines. That makes you a kidnapper in my book. One of the deputies, a lanky man with a scarred cheek, laughed. And we hang kidnappers, don't we, Sheriff? The sheriff's grin widened. That we do. People had started to gather now, shopkeepers, ranch hands, women with children. They stood on the porches and in doorways watching. Caleb didn't move. You can't touch her here. She's done nothing wrong. That's not for you to decide. Then who decides? You. The sheriff took a step closer, his hand resting on his revolver. That's right. I'm the law in these parts. What I say goes. Caleb's jaw tightened. The law's supposed to protect people, not humiliate them. You got a problem with how I run things, stranger? Yeah, I do. The sheriff's smile faded. Then maybe you need to be taught a lesson. He drew his gun. Caleb's hand moved fast, not to his own gun, but to push Eliza back toward the boarding house. She stumbled, catching herself against the wall. Caleb, she shouted. But before the sheriff could fire, a voice rang out from across the street. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Dalton. Everyone turned. An older man stepped out from the general store, the same man who'd nodded at Caleb earlier. He was lean, weathered, with a silver beard and sharp eyes. He carried a rifle, held low but ready. The sheriff's expression darkened. This ain't your concern, Edgar. It is when you ride into my town, waving your gun around. Your town, the sheriff laughed. You're just a shopkeeper, old man. Edgar's voice was calm, but there was iron in it. I'm also the mayor, and I'm telling you to holster that weapon and leave. The sheriff glanced around. More people were stepping forward now, other men, some holding tools, others just standing firm. A blacksmith with arms like tree trunks. A ranch hand Caleb recognized from years back. A woman with a shotgun resting on her shoulder. Not an army, just townsfolk, but enough to make a point. The sheriff's jaw clenched. His deputies shifted uneasily. Edgar stepped closer, his rifle still in hand. You've got no jurisdiction here, Dalton, and we don't take kindly to bullies. The sheriff's eyes flicked from Edgar to Caleb to the gathering crowd. For a moment, it looked like he might try. His hand tightened on his gun. Then slowly, he holstered it. This ain't over, he said, his voice low and venomous. It is for today, Edgar replied. The sheriff stared at Caleb for a long moment. Then he turned and walked back to his horse. His deputies followed, casting nervous glances at the crowd. They mounted up and rode out, kicking up dust as they disappeared down the road. The tension eased. The crowd began to disperse, murmuring among themselves. Edgar walked over to Caleb, lowering his rifle. You all right, son? Caleb nodded, thank you. Edgar glanced at Eliza, taking in her shorn hair, the bruises on her wrists, the haunted look in her eyes. His expression softened. She's welcome here, he said quietly, and so are you. Caleb looked back at Eliza. She was leaning against the boarding house wall, her arms wrapped around herself, his hat still on her head. She met his gaze. Her eyes were full of something he couldn't name, fear maybe, or relief, or both. Let's get you inside, Caleb said. She nodded. As they walked toward the boarding house, Caleb felt the weight of what had just happened settle over him. The sheriff would come back. Men like that always did. But for now, they were safe. For now, that was enough. Mrs. Bellamy was a sturdy woman with kind eyes and silver hair pulled into a tight bun. She took one look at Eliza and didn't ask questions, just led her upstairs to a small room with a clean bed, a wash basin, and a window that looked out over the hills. You rest, she said gently. I'll bring you some supper later. Eliza nodded, too tired to speak. Caleb waited downstairs in the narrow front room. Mrs. Bellamy came down, and poured him coffee without asking. "She looks like she's been through hell," she said quietly. "She has. You the one who got her out?" Caleb nodded. Mrs. Bellamy studied him. "That why the sheriff was here?" "Yeah." She sipped her own coffee, her gaze thoughtful. "You planning to stay?" "A night, maybe two." "And then?" Caleb looked down at his cup. "Then I move on." Mrs. Bellamy made a small sound, somewhere between a sigh and a hum. "Men like you always move on. Question is, why?" Caleb didn't answer. She patted his shoulder. "Well, you're welcome here as long as you need. Room's $5 a night, meals included." "Thank you." She left him alone. He sat there for a long time, staring at the coffee. Later that evening, Caleb sat on the porch outside the boarding house, watching the sun sink low. The sky was streaked with orange and red, the kind of sunset that made the whole world feel quiet. The door opened behind him. Eliza stepped out, moving slowly. She'd washed, changed into a plain dress Mrs. Bellamy must have given her. Her hair was still short, uneven, but clean now. She still wore Caleb's hat. She sat down beside him on the step, careful to leave space between them. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Eliza broke the silence. "Why did you keep the photograph?" Caleb didn't look at her. "I told you to remember." "To punish yourself, you mean?" He didn't deny it. Eliza pulled her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. "I used to think about that night every day, what I could have done different, if I'd been faster, braver, if I'd fought harder." Caleb's voice was rough. "You were a child." "So were you." "Not the same." "Isn't it?" She turned to him. "You think you're the only one carrying guilt." Caleb finally looked at her. Her eyes were clear, steady. "I survived," Eliza said quietly. "My sister didn't, my mother didn't, and for years I hated myself for that. I hated that I was the one who lived." She looked down at her hands, but hating myself didn't bring them back. It just made the weight heavier. Caleb swallowed hard. "What changed?" "Nothing, I still carry it, but I stopped letting it be the only thing I carry." The wind moved through the street, stirring the dust. "You saved me back there," Eliza said. "In that courtyard, you didn't have to, you could have ridden past, but you didn't." "I couldn't." "Because of the photograph." "Because it was the right thing to do." Eliza tilted her head. "That's the first time you've said that without sounding like you're trying to convince yourself." Caleb almost smiled, almost. She reached up and adjusted the hat on her head. "You know, when you put this on me, I thought you were mocking me." "I wasn't." "I know that now, but in that moment, I couldn't see past the shame. All I could feel was how small I'd been made, how broken." Her voice softened. "But then you told me I didn't have to kneel anymore, and something shifted." Caleb looked at her. "What?" "I don't know, maybe just permission to stand, to take up space again." She paused. "That's what your hat felt like. Not pity, not charity, just dignity given back." Caleb's throat tightened. "So if you're still with me," Eliza said, a faint smile touching her lips, "I want to ask you something. If you were me, would you?" "You forgive you." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, then he shook his head. "No, I wouldn't." "Then why should I?" "You shouldn't." Eliza nodded slowly. "Good, because I'm not ready to, not yet." "I know. But maybe someday." Caleb looked at her, something shifting in his chest. "Maybe." They sat there in the fading light, two people bound by fire and loss, and the long road between guilt and grace. "I think I'll stay here," Eliza said after a while. "In Silver Ridge, Mrs. Bellamy said she needs help in the kitchen. It's honest work." "It's good work." "And you still leaving?" Caleb looked out at the horizon. "I don't know yet." Eliza stood, brushing dust from her dress. She took off the hat and held it out to him. "You should have this back now." Caleb shook his head. "Keep it a little longer." Why? Because you're not done needing it yet. She smiled, small but real. You said that before. Still true. She put the hat back on and turned toward the door. Before she went inside, she paused. Caleb. Yes. Thank you for standing when it mattered. He nodded. You're welcome. She went inside, and Caleb sat alone on the porch as night fell over Silver Ridge. The stars came out, one by one, and for the first time in 16 years, the weight on his chest felt just a little lighter. 3 days passed. Caleb stayed in Silver Ridge, though he wasn't sure why at first. He told himself it was to make sure Eliza settled in, that the sheriff didn't come back, that she was safe. But the truth was simpler. He didn't want to leave. Eliza worked in Mrs. Bellamy's kitchen, serving meals, scrubbing dishes, sweeping floors. She was quiet, efficient. The townsfolk treated her kindly, though some still stared at her hair. She didn't seem to mind. She wore Caleb's hat most days, indoors and out. Caleb took odd jobs, fixing fences, shoeing horses, hauling lumber for the new church roof. Edgar, the mayor, paid him fair and asked no questions. On the 4th night, Caleb was sitting on the porch again when Edgar joined him, carrying 2 glasses and a bottle of whiskey. You look like a man who could use a drink, Edgar said. Caleb took the glass, appreciate it. They drank in silence for a while, watching the last light fade from the sky. She's doing well, Edgar said, the girl. She's stronger than she looks. Most people are. Edgar poured another measure. You planning to tell me what really happened back in Benton's Crossing? Caleb told him all of it. The courtyard, the ropes, the hair, the sheriff's cruelty, his own guilt about the Cartwright family. When he finished, Edgar was quiet for a long time. That's a heavy load to carry, he finally said. It's mine to carry. Maybe, but it doesn't have to be yours alone. Caleb looked at him. Edgar smiled faintly. You think you're the only man in this town with ghosts? Hell, son, half the folks here are running from something. War, loss, mistakes they can't undo. That's what the West is, a place where broken people try to build something new. He leaned back. You did right by that girl. Whatever came before, you did right when it counted. Caleb swirled the whiskey in his glass. Doesn't change what I didn't do. No, but it changes what you did, and that matters too. 2 weeks later, the sheriff came back. It was early morning. Caleb was at the blacksmith's shop when he heard the shout. Riders! He dropped the hammer he'd been holding and ran toward the center of town. Sheriff Dalton and 6 men rode in fast, kicking up dust. This time they weren't here to talk. Dalton dismounted, his hand already on his gun. His eyes scanned the street until they landed on Caleb. There he is, Dalton said, the kidnapper. Caleb stepped into the street. You've got no business here, Dalton. I got a warrant says I do, for you and the girl. Warrant's not worth the paper it's written on. Dalton's deputies spread out, flanking him. They were armed, tense, ready for violence. People started coming out of buildings, shopkeepers, ranch hands, families. Edgar stepped out of the general store, rifle in hand. You were told to leave, Dalton, Edgar said. And I told you this wasn't over. Dalton's voice was cold. Now step aside, old man, this is the law. The law doesn't justify cruelty, a voice said. Everyone turned. Eliza stood on the porch of the boarding house. She'd taken off Caleb's hat, holding it in her hands. Her short, uneven hair was exposed, but she stood tall, her chin lifted. You humiliated me, she said, her voice steady. You tied me up like an animal, cut my hair to shame me, and you called it justice. Dalton sneered. You were a thief. I took 1 piece of bread because I hadn't eaten in 3 days. You took my dignity because you could. She stepped down into the street, moving slowly toward him. Caleb tensed, ready to move, but Edgar put a hand on his shoulder. Let her speak, Edgar murmured. Eliza stopped a few feet from Dalton. You wanted me to F. Eel small, powerless, like I was nothing. She held up the hat, but this man gave me something back, not pity, not charity, dignity. She looked around at the gathered crowd, and these people, they stood for me when you came to take it away again. Dalton's face twisted with anger. You think a speech changes anything, girl? No, but the truth does. Edgar stepped forward, his rifle raised slightly. And the truth is, Dalton, you've got no authority here, no jurisdiction, and no friends. More people moved into the street now, men and women both. The blacksmith, the baker, a rancher who'd worked with Caleb, a young mother holding her daughter's hand. Not a mob, just townsfolk who'd decided they'd had enough. Dalton looked around, his jaw clenched. His deputies shifted nervously, hands hovering near their guns. You pull that trigger, Edgar said quietly, and you won't make it out of this town. Dalton's hand trembled. For a moment, it looked like he might try. Then one of his deputies, the scarred one, spoke up. Sheriff, this ain't worth it. Dalton glared at him. Shut your mouth. There's too many of them. We should go. Another deputy nodded. He's right, boss. Let's just ride out. Dalton stood there, fury boiling in his eyes. But slowly, reluctantly, he let his hand drop from his gun. This ain't over, he said, his voice shaking with rage. Yeah, Edgar replied, it is. Dalton spat into the dirt, then turned and mounted his horse. His deputies followed, and they rode out hard, disappearing into the hills. The crowd exhaled, some cheered, others just nodded, satisfied. Eliza walked over to Caleb and handed him his hat. I think I'm done needing this now. Caleb took it, his throat tight. You sure? She smiled. I'm sure. He put the hat back on his head, and for the first time in years, it felt right. 3 months later, Silver Ridge settled into a rhythm. Eliza had her own room at the boarding house now, paid for with her wages. She worked alongside Mrs. Bellamy, but she also helped at the general store, learning to keep books and manage inventory. Caleb stayed too. He didn't mean to at first, but there was always work, and Edgar always had something that needed fixing. One evening, he and Eliza sat on the porch again, watching the sunset. You ever think about leaving? She asked. Sometimes. But you don't. Caleb shrugged. Nowhere better to go. Eliza smiled. That's not why you stay. No. No. He looked at her. Then why do I stay? Because you're not running anymore. Caleb was quiet, then he nodded slowly. Maybe you're right. She leaned back, gazing at the horizon. I forgive you, by the way. Caleb's breath caught. Eliza. I don't forget, but I forgive. He didn't know what to say. You stood for me when no one else would, she said quietly. That matters. Caleb swallowed hard. Thank you. They sat in silence as the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in gold and crimson. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang. Children laughed in the street. Life moved forward, imperfect and beautiful. Caleb looked down at the hat in his hands, the one he'd given her, the one she'd given back. It wasn't just a hat anymore, it was a symbol of dignity restored, of second chances, of standing when it mattered. He placed it on the railing between them. And they sat there together, two people no longer running, watching the light fade over Silver Ridge. The past couldn't be changed, but the future could still be written. And for the first time, Caleb believed that maybe, just maybe, his story wasn't over yet.